Welcome back, everybody, to the interviews with worldwide experts about vitality, balance, breathing, and how to help your pets live the longest lives possible, of the highest quality possible. And today we've got a breathing expert, one piece of the vitality puzzle, a breathing expert in Ireland, Patrick?
Yes, correct. Yeah, it's in
Yeah.
Ireland.
He's he specializes in the Butenko
Buteyko. Mm-hmm.
method of breathing, which is a method of breathing through your nose, which of course our dogs and cats mainly do, as far as breathing through their noses. But welcome, Patrick. Thanks so much for being here
Sure.
with us.
Thanks, Dr. Jeff. Yes, of course.
It's great to have you, and it's again an honor that you're willing to speak with us. Why don't we just launch right in? What is your conception, your thoughts about vitality? On all levels. From the physical up to the emotional, and just vitality in general.
I think in terms of life, I suppose we're all striving for the one thing, we're striving for happiness. There's so many pressures from a societal level and also in organizations and family level. And, oftentimes human beings they're not necessarily allowed to live their own lives because they're conditioned to live the lives of others the way people want them to live their lives. There must be a balance. And there must be a balance. I remember working for a multinational at one point. This was going back after my degree was in economics, and I hadn't came across breathing because I came across breathing for my own health. And I remember working for this multinational, and multinational is very well respected multinational. It was my first job after university. And I remember how everything was sold to us. But when you dug a little bit deeper and you look at the reasons of why it was sold, the true explanation was never explained to us. It was often that it was sold in a way that the information was changed to get the most out of employees, to milk employees, to get really long hours out of employees, for employees to upsell customers, and for employees to upsell customers on the basis that you were doing the customer a service, but of course you weren't. You were doing the company a service. So I think there's a lot of pressures on individuals. And the reason that I bring in work, because work consumes at least the greatest proportion of our week. And first of all, in terms of vitality, if we are not in an occupation that we like, we are going to be drained of energy. If we are not in a relationship that we get on with people, we are going to be drained of energy. So aside from health, very often is we need to look at the emotional aspect of it. And the emotional aspect of it is very much overlooked, or it's looked in very plain ways. For example, we are trained how to think. We are not taught how to stop thinking. We are not taught how to understand the minds, not from a theoretical point of view, but from a practical point of view, that if, for example, we have worries and concerns, how to bring a calmness to the mind. We can do that through the breath, but this is not taught in traditional education. Traditional education teaches us many subjects, but often neglects the most important subjects that we would need in life. So coming back to, life-work balance, it is about having an occupation that you love to do. It is about managing stress and having techniques to manage stress. It is about living the life that you want to live without the sinister control. And this is not conspiracy or anything like that. I'm not in any way into that. But I even just looked at my own home country in Ireland and the control that organizations had on the country and the population for decades. And now that the population is better educated and they have a freedom to think, that they have the ability to choose which direction that they want to live. It's the power that people can have over other people is something that, why do they want that? Why do they want to direct the population in a certain way? Because many of the times, and even employees, it's to fulfill their aims, but they never explain their true intentions. They coax it, they coat the information, with sugar, but underneath it is a certain amount of bitterness.
We're so lucky in veterinary medicine that our dogs don't have any of that you know
Yes.
uh, social aspect of, or a negative social aspect, which does drain their vitality. But I wanted to just kind of summarize for
But I'm sure there's a few dog owners though that the owners are so screwed up that the dogs are screwed up as a result of it.
that, and that's where I was actually about to go, is that I wanted to connect that vitality that you said comes from, or partially comes from, your connection with the world and the way you live your life and interact with the world. And for your dogs, it's a simple matter of, playing and being joyful and doing their snuffle mat, which is a breathing tool, and going on those sniff walks and having good life and good food. But for their guardians, it's not so simple. And yeah, it's really, really, really important um, to try and raise your own vitality by breathing techniques and other methods of living a good life, which is what you're I think trying to talk
Well,
a little about. And
maybe the dog and the cat can teach us something. The dog
def-
and the cat knows when to relax. They
and,
don't feel guilty about relaxing. The human
and
being does.
yep, exactly. And one of my theories is that cats that can live into their 20s, 30s, and even beyond, Um, part of the reason they can do that is that ability to relax and conserve energy, and that energy is then available for their cells to work properly. And the other component of living a good life for kitty cats is purring, which is akin to, like the ujjayi breath, the restricted breathing, the slow breathing of in yoga. And I believe is that one of the things, special kinds of breathing that you teach people to do to reduce their risk, to increase their cellular immunity, to increase their just function in general. Well,
Well, I
purring
suppose,
is,
and maybe the human equivalent is humming, because humming is vibrating the nasal cavity. And by vibrating the nasal cavity, there's the gas nitric oxide is released more readily from the paranasal sinuses into the nasal cavity. So that when we carry that nitric oxide then into the lungs, nitric oxide is helping to redistribute the blood throughout the lungs and to improve oxygen uptake and oxygen transfer from the lungs into the blood. So, but I can also imagine humming, especially when it's a prolonged exhalation. It stimulates the vagus nerve, and it helps to get a balance between the parasympathetic and sympathetic response, that we can bring ourselves into relaxation, especially if we're switched on, you know. And again, that's another aspect that the cat and the dog doesn't have to deal with. They don't have to answer emails. They don't have to answer text messaging. They don't have to answer WhatsApp, Instagram, Facebook. They're not contacted from 15 different directions. And yeah, the cat and dog has it in many ways. Um, you know,
they can teach us a lot, a lot.
for
And,
sure.
right now we're getting a great lesson because, cats especially, but dogs as well, I think 60 some odd animals around the world have been positive for SARS, but all they do is get mild symptoms because they're so relaxed, they're so worried, their bodies are working so well that they just don't get COVID-19 serious disease from the SARS virus. They just fight it off like they do any other virus, which is kind of what you would
It's cool.
hope for us as well.
Yes. But maybe that would have happened when we were living 100 years ago, when we were growing our own food, when we had control of our own food, that it wasn't under the domain of major multinationals, that we didn't have our lands poisoned with weed killer and with Roundup, and we didn't have, the real shock to the immunity. We've really devastated things in 100 years. I really wonder if we made progress at all on some levels, and that the animal world would have a lot to teach us, in terms of the animals are living, they are able to live in harmony. They are able to live the lives that they have. That's the reason for their existence. Whereas the human being, with all our intelligence, sometimes it's very much important that we get back to basics, that we realize, or at least that we realize that we do have some independence, and we do and can control our destiny to some degree. And sometimes it's good to step back and, just step back to have a clearer picture of what's going on.
Wonderful, great, yeah. And that connection with nature, which animals have that we don't have, that does seem to be correlated with longevity. When you look at like the blue zones around the world, all those people are more connected with nature, more active, eating a fresher diet,
Yes.
breathing properly, and their big factor is that connection to others, which I know is a huge activator for the parasympathetic versus sympathetic reflex, and that is kind of what we're talking about. So there we've connected vitality and energy and happiness and quality of life. Talked a little bit about balance. Do you have any other thoughts about the cellular balance of energy in the body, aside from what the world is throwing at us? Can breathing help improve balance?
Well, the functioning of the autonomic nervous system, the automatic functioning of the body that's typically outside of our control, we can very much influence that through the breath, and probably the breath as being the main influencer of it. And a lot of research in the last 30 years specializing around heart rate variability biofeedback, that we don't want equal time between each heartbeat, and there is a synchronicity between the time between our heartbeats and our respiration. And typically during rest, when we breathe in, our heart rate should be getting faster, and when we breathe out, our heart rate should be slowing down. And the varying in timing between the beats, the aorta-aura interval, is very important as an indicator of the functioning of the autonomic nervous system. Through the breath, we can increase that. We also know that, the stress, the impact that stress has on the human body. Like if you go to a doctor and you say to your doctor, you're feeling stress, well, the doctor doesn't necessarily have a means of measuring it objectively, but using heart rate variability biofeedback, you can. And it's more accepted, so it can provide you an indicator of the balance of the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system. So heart rate variability is just to give you feedback, but the means of getting there is changing breathing patterns. And a few aspects would be, one is breathing through your nose during sleep. That automatically improves heart rate variability. We've countless people wearing Oura rings, tracking their own HRV scores and reporting that their sleep is deeper and that the body is more rested. And also with COVID-19, one paper which was published, or one article published by Elsevier about a month ago, shows that nasal breathing during sleep may reduce viral load, because it's giving the immune system sufficient time to launch an adequate response. And so nasal breathing during sleep is very important, but even just gently slowing down your breathing and slowing it down to the point of a slight air hunger, that also increases heart rate variability. And then you could slow your breathing rate down to between 5.5 and 6.5 breaths per minute, which is, during that practice, not that we should be breathing like that every minute, every hour, every day, but it's that we spend some time taking our attention out of the mind onto the breath, into the body, and gently slowing down our breathing. And I suppose the breath is the one constant thing that we have. We don't give our body attention. and we don't bring our breathing inwards. We don't bring our attention inwards. And maybe this ties in with the points that I made at the start, and maybe I sound cynical, but I often wonder, I think there are very, very intelligent people. And, you know, we as human beings are literally, if you see even on a level of the retail world now and the communications world, and everything is occupied by mainly one company. Everything is becoming like a monopoly. You know, I don't think it's a good idea to have one company in control of all retail, because it puts a lot of stress and they have a lot of power in terms of dictating to others. I don't think it's a good idea to have one company in control of all social media and advertising, because again, they have so much power. And also they have the intelligence, for example, in terms of the younger generation with the addiction, the psychological addiction through social media, that is literally, you know, as youngsters are hitting like buttons and like buttons and like buttons, that it's very well orchestrated. So here's my point on this, even though I'm going around in a circle. Many aspects of human modern life is taking our attention. Many people are spending so much time looking into their phone. They are spending so much time looking at information which is absolutely useless to them. But it's almost that they are hypnotized, and that they don't realize that ultimately the big multinational company who has set this up, they want you to look at your phone and they want you to spend a lot of time on their platform because this is generating revenue. So it's not about this social media. In actual fact, it's anti-social media. And it's anti-social because I've been in restaurants and I've been in cafes, and I'm sure you have as well. And you see a family, and mom is looking into her phone, dad is looking into the phone, all of the children are looking into the phone. So all of our attention is going inwards, and it's really high time that we start bringing our attention, all of our attention is going outwards. It's really high time that we bring our attention inwards. And I'd be curious from your perspective, that a cat and a dog, are they living in their head, or are they dispersing their attention throughout their body? In other words, they don't consciously think the way we think as human beings, but where is their attention? You know, they're obviously not worried about the future. They're not thinking about the past. They're very much in present moment awareness. They're moving simultaneously with time. But I would also say that as they walk with every cell of their body, that they are giving attention throughout their body. They know to relax. And the intelligence as well, I believe that during the tsunami that hit Asia back, I can't remember how many years ago now it was, that animals realized that something was happening and they moved to a higher ground. That there's something really amazing going on there. That, and of course, science wants to explain everything, but you know, there's an intelligence going on there, and we don't even know the basic first reason. The first question is, we don't even know why we're here, and yet we want to try and answer all of these questions. We're not going to do it, but maybe human beings, we have lost touch of the basic art that the animals are innately in tune with.
Wow, you've said so many great things and great topics that I wanted to explore, but we're going to run out of time. But I've got to hit this one, because basically you're talking about the flat Earth paradigm that we're in, where we're not seeing beyond, we're not seeing the morphic field, Rupert Sheldrake's morphic field that connects all beings, that connects, you know, because that relates to non-physical energy that in our paradigm doesn't exist. And unfortunately, without that, you know, we're not going to be able to explain a lot of the phenomena that you just described. But I do want to also go back briefly to HRV, which is heart rate variability. We don't measure it in our animals, but we measure it in people. The Core Sense is actually the HRV monitor that I use. It's a wonderful little thing. You just stick your finger in it. It seems very accurate. There's a lot of research behind this. But here's my question, and I'm sorry to run on. Do you think there's any relation between HRV, heart rate variability, and your ability to deal with viruses or bacteria? In other words, is your balance in your body as important or not as important or more important than the germ? Or is the germ,
It's a good
the
question. I don't have the full answer. We know that if you can increase vagal tone, you reduce inflammation. That if we can bring about a better balance, it would make sense that the immune system, which is an integral part of the human body, that the immune system has the space to operate better. We know that many autoimmune diseases are when the immune system goes awry. And individuals who have immune system problems, including, for instance, asthma, inflammation of the lungs, irritable bowel syndrome, rheumatoid arthritis, and other immune systems, other autoimmune diseases, that we can influence that through the breath to increase heart rate variability. So there's probably some connection there that we can influence the immune system by changing breathing patterns. And the other question that you would ask here is, well, does stress make the immune system more prone and more vulnerable? And stress does. People who are under chronic long-term stress, they are more vulnerable to different diseases. So on the basis, and this is just using the words of Dr. Herbert Benson, who wrote that book back in 1975 called The Relaxation Response, if stress makes people sick, relaxation will help make them better. But relaxation on the basis of how do we relax? And sometimes human beings, I've had the question, people say to me, well, how do I relax? Can you imagine a human being not being able to relax? The cat is able to relax. The dog is able to relax. The wild animal is able to relax. And animals, when they're under stress, it's typically short-term stress, unless they are under the ownership of a human being with a deranged mind. But animals in the wild have short-term stresses. And, and human beings throughout our evolution, we were evolved to cope with short-term stresses. We are not evolved to cope with long-term stresses. And long-term stresses from an environmental point of view, long-term stresses from a finance or from a marital point of view, but also from an occupational point of view. The amount of emails that I received. So I submitted one book for publication. Well, it's just a manuscript at the moment, and usually it goes through quite a process before publication on Monday. But the book that I want to look at now is going to be interesting, and that's looking at the psychology, that's looking at burnout syndrome, and that's looking at corporate structures, that's looking at where human beings have lost the right to be able to, bring their attention inwards and, just going back to basics. And that's a book that I want to look at because I think it's very timely. I think it's very necessary. I'm 48 years of age. Many people in their 40s are burning out, and they are pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed to the point of burnout. And that's sick in a way, So I know you could ask the question, well, is it what's causing the burnout, or is it that the individual doesn't have the coping skills to be able to deal with the stress? It goes two ways. I used to be stressed in my early 20s, but when I look back, I didn't have great coping mechanisms. Now I can deal with stress a lot better. My resilience is a lot better. And that would have been through the breath that I've been able to build up my resilience. So the people who are burning out now, is it that they are just very vulnerable, that they burn out easily, that they can't take the stresses and the tolls that society is putting them on them? And, maybe there's many answers to this, and maybe there's many questions. When we grew up, it was tough enough, Life wasn't handed everything to us. We had to work. We had to go out. We had plenty of time on our own for play. We weren't watching video games all day, every day. We weren't stuck looking at computer games. We were out in fresh air. We were out in the countryside. We were getting up to what boys get up to, climbing trees, falling off trees, robbing orchards, doing all of those things that are part of normal way of growing up. We didn't get everything that we wanted. We didn't have instant gratification. So nowadays, maybe with youngsters, that you can, because society now is more richer, parents can give their child everything that they want. So now the child doesn't have to work for it. Now the child is completely sheltered. Now the child doesn't get exposed to any stress. And as a result, then they go through their entire childhood and their teenage years, no stress in their life. And now they're supposed to go into the big bad world and cope for themselves without having an ability to be able to deal with what life is going to throw at us. Life is ups and downs. So I think, there's so many things to it, and maybe this conversation is going completely in one tangent. And it's kind of just, yeah, it's very interesting to see that the issue with mental health at the moment, which seemingly is getting more and more, the incidence is increasing of depression, of bipolar, of all of these different conditions, of high stress, of anxiety, burnout syndrome, etc. And what's the reasons for that? And probably the reasons are multifaceted, but I think one of those reasons are that we're coddling. The children are being coddled. Universities now are afraid to generate debate among students in case you're hurting the feeling of students. Like it's gone from being, so liberal in some ways that it was nearly too extreme on one end, to going completely the other way, that it's gone too extreme the other end. So I think we need a balancing on that as well. And that all ties in with breathing, because if our society, if there's a stress on the outside, it's going to influence our breathing, because we're going into that state of fight or flight. And breathing could be a help in terms of getting the balance back.
So it's all about balance, whether it's
Mm.
work life, whether it's balance in your diet or balance in your life. We focus a lot, and I know we need to wrap it up soon, but I wanted to quickly, because we hit a bunch of topics about energy, and now we're talking about stress. In my mind, and from what I've read, and I'd love to hear what you think, stress, and by stress, I mean not just emotional stress that people may get, but any kind of stress on the system of the body, which is in what's called the dynamic equilibrium. We're living our life by our cells functioning. Then a stressor, like an emotional stress or bacteria or toxin or a bad food, affects us and changes the balance. And that, in my mind, lowers your energy, your cellular energy and ability to heal. And I'm wondering, have you ever thought about how energy and symptoms and stressors to the body, how all that interrelates with breathing or other methods of coping? Then we'll wrap up, I promise.
Energy levels. Like, how can we have energy levels unless we have a good night's sleep? And when I'm talking about having a good night's sleep, I'm not talking about having adequate number of hours, or I'm not talking about having a dark bedroom or airy bedroom and all that. A good night's sleep is about having little resistance to your breathing. It's about nasal breathing. It's about not stopping breathing during your sleep, not having constant sleep fragmentation and sleep interruptions. If you look at, say, for example, the condition obstructive sleep apnea, that here, as a result of probably craniofacial changes happening in the human being, that the shape of the human face is changing. And in some ways, it's like some dogs, it's happened to, for instance, the British Bulldog, that literally they have no airway and they're very compromised in terms of sleep and health. But the human being's face is changing as well. And the human being's face is changing. And it's not just that the face is changing, but the airway is getting compromised. Crooked teeth, for example, is a relatively recent phenomena in civilization. And crooked teeth is not primarily genetics. Crooked teeth is epigenetics. It's the environment and genes coming together. And crooked teeth are a sign that the airway is not adequate. Because if the jaws, if the maxilla and the mandible develop the way it should do, with the tongue resting in the roof of the mouth, driving the growth of the jaws forward, there will be plenty of room for the tongue. There will be plenty of room in the airway. But many people with when you come back to energy, like for me, energy is on how the person feels. For me, energy is, Can you cope with, you know, tasks that life is throwing at you, and that you have the energy to sustain that, and also by how you feel. You know, we don't want to feel dead. We don't want to feel like the walking dead. We want to be resilient. We want to be vibrant. For 20 years, I was exhausted, and I was exhausted on the basis of having chronic mouth breathing and nasal obstruction. And when I was in university, I remember the students telling me when I was in dorms to say, "Oh, we heard you snoring." And God, my God, you said your snoring was absolutely unbelievable, which it was. But then they said, "Well, we heard you snoring, but then we heard you stop breathing, and we thought you were going to die. And then you would snore and you would stop breathing." I had no idea what it was. But all I knew was for me to concentrate, I couldn't keep up. And for me to get my grades, I had to really put the work in. And then I came across the importance of nasal breathing and breathing through my nose. And I taped my mouth 20 years ago, and I've been taping my mouth during sleep ever since. And that has been the single most important thing that I've ever done to my sleep. And there is an interconnectedness between sleep and breathing and emotions. But I would say that the foundation is going to be good sleep. But if breathing is off, and if you have nasal obstruction, you know, they were 1.8 times more likely to have moderate to severe sleep disorder breathing. When we have moderate to severe sleep disorder breathing, that's going to impact our emotions. So many people come into me with mental health issues. They come in with anxiety, depression, panic disorder. And when you ask them, how do you feel when you wake up in the morning? And more often than not, they will tell you that they wake up feeling exhausted. And then I asked them, well, has your doctor ever investigated your sleep quality? And they say no. And I think it's because all too often we anticipate that it's the depression which is causing the exhaustion. It's the anxiety that the person is going through which is causing the exhaustion. But maybe we have to consider that it's the poor sleep which is causing the exhaustion, and it's the exhaustion that's causing the depression. Because if you're chronically exhausted for weeks and months and you have to be productive in modern society, you're not going to cope with it. And that's going to increase stress and anxiety. So, you know, definitely energy levels, getting the mouth closed is absolutely vital. And now the research is starting to come out about it, you know, which is great. But I remember being at several sleep congresses, and both in Europe and in North America. And with that, you know, some of these sleep congresses have 1,000 people at them. Like they're pretty big events. I remember there was lecture after lecture after lecture about the importance of sleep quality. And then one doctor stood up in the room in the audience. His name is Dr. Christian Guilleminault. He developed and he coined the phrase obstructive sleep apnea back in the 1970s. And he developed the apnea hypopnea index, which is a measurement of sleep apnea severity. And he said to his colleagues, he says, "You have talked about everything in the room except the elephant in the room. And the elephant in the room is breathing in and out through your nose." So, you know, when you think about the individual, and many of your listeners, especially when they're over 40 years of age, they wake up with a dry mouth in the morning. They have their tongue, they're not able to have their tongue resting in the roof of the mouth. The tongue then is more likely to encroach onto the airway. They might be lying on their back and their jaws falling into their throat, you know, and they have sleep disorder breathing. And, you know, then you look at the connection between sleep disorder breathing and health, including dementia, and there's a link there. So if you were to look at the animal world, you know, the animals where nature has allowed them to develop the way they should develop before we breeded, say, for example, dogs, etc., that they have adequate airways, that they're not dying of obstructive sleep apnea. But I would think that some animals with a compromised airway, that literally they have no neck, that, you know, their airway is, and as a result, they are prone to the problems that we as human beings are being prone to.
Yep, exactly. And that's great. Thank you. Yeah, they're called brachycephalics in the dog world, and they've got the pushed-in face, and they're living on the border of hypoxia, is what I like to say. You know, and that they're not breathing, but I again want to respect your time, and I really appreciate your being with us. But I want to sum up. Breathe through your nose.
Mm-hmm.
Try to breathe mindfully and slowly, and, you know, breathe like your kitty cat does when
Mm-hmm.
they're purring, try and hum or use ujjayi breathing in your breath. And of course, try to minimize stress, which will have a direct effect on your cellular energy and your body's ability to heal, and ward off stressors like the virus or bacteria or toxins or anything else in the environment.
Mm-hmm.
Is there
And
anything?
yes, of course. How many human beings are intentionally taking big breaths because they believe that it's good to breathe more air to bring more oxygen in? I've never seen. I have 2 dogs out there. I have 2 cats. I've got 4 hens. Um, I've never seen my hens going around with their mouths open. I'm looking down at them now, actually. Um, I've never seen my dogs intentionally taking huge, big breaths because they believe it's beneficial to be big breathing. I've never seen the cat doing it either. And the cats are very good at nasal breathing. I know the dogs don't be, but the dogs breathe through their mouth to regulate body temperature. So yeah, I think it's we can learn a lot from our animals.
Yeah, fantastic. So thank you so much. I really
Sure, you're very
appreciate
welcome.
that, Patrick. I That was the 26 references in your breathing and infection articles. So I'll make sure everyone reads that. And
Hmm.
I'm looking forward to your new book. And thank you, thank you, thank you. We really appreciate it. And have a great afternoon.
Sure, you too, Dr. Jeff.
All
Thanks very
right.
much.
Thank you,
Take care.
Patrick. Bye bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.